Hey, welcome back on the Good Morning Artesia radio show, and we're having our weekly conversation with Mayor Raye Miller as the city council met last night, and we've been talking about the different items that the council worked on last night. And Mayor, where did we leave off? Where would you like to resume in your report here?
Well, like I say, we had a variety of different topics last night. In the police department report, Chief Roberts actually gave an update on the massive law enforcement gathering that they had here in the community. That concerted effort of multiple agencies, Sheriff's Department, State Police, FBI. There were mass, and they had done one in Carlsbad. They've now done one in Artesia, fixing to do one in Roswell, and basically it's an effort to just let folks know that if you're not doing things the way you should, that there are folks that are out there looking for you to, But anyway, it resulted in several arrests. There was federal arrests. There were 5 state arrests. There was, I think 3 firearms that were seized. There were some drugs that were seized. I mean, it was a concerted effort, and it's one of those things where, lots of citations were given, and I made the comment, I'm glad, well, one, I didn't know we had a concerted effort, but I guess that's because I didn't get a citation.
You weren't on the list.
Well, and I mean, I think they stopped folks for speeding and everything else in a concerted effort, and then, if there was suspicion by the folks that they did, they actually did a search warrant on one of the vehicles because of suspicion based on a vehicular stop, and identified some drug issues in the vehicle. So, I mean, it's a thing where I appreciate what our police and fire do, and it's a thing where this community, unlike some around our nation that seem to think that, having a social worker is better than having a policeman, this community still supports and wants our police to enforce our laws and to protect us from folks who don't do the right things, and we do appreciate them.
Yep, we're very thankful for that.
Yeah, it was a good report. We then wound up having in the infrastructure department, which you wouldn't think of, but anyway, the Woodbine Cemetery Crematorium Operations and Services Resolution with the fee schedule for the columbarium charges and description.
Okay.
So, but a cemetery is one of the components of the infrastructure. I mean, Port Byron has streets and parks and cemetery and wastewater and sanitation and water. I mean, if there's an area that there's a problem, you can just automatically probably send them to Byron's office because he probably has all the problem children. But anyway, they have new facilities in place out there, and some folks prefer to be buried in that fashion instead of in the ground, and as a result, that's all been set up and approved at this point.
I'm going to ask, I hope not a silly question, but have we had a crematorium previously, or is this a brand new
I think this
service?
is brand new type of facility that has been built and all, and from my understanding, each vault or whatever, you can have 2 folks in it. So, and obviously most people don't die together, but anyway, you can place one in and then it can be reopened. There's a charge for it to be reopened and the second one placed in. But anyway, I'm like, and the beauty of it is we have a cemetery board. I know that they've been working on this for a few years. I think it's finally completed, and I attended one of their meetings, listened to a lot of the discussion, and I thought, well, this is great. These folks understand. They've worked through the project. They had great discussion about, one's on top, one's in the middle, one's down below, and, all the different ideas about, fees and stuff. And I'm like, okay, they're in the weeds, and I don't need to be there.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's a thing where I do appreciate, because we have so many folks in this community that volunteer for library board, museum board, cemetery board, senior center. It's amazing, P&Z, how many recreation commission folks volunteer their time to try to make this community better, and they're not receiving anything except a use of their time in trying to help. So
great.
It's a really good thing. But anyway, that was approved there. We then wound up having, and unfortunately Summer was on vacation, Valverde, our new city clerk, but we had a budget resolution. We had a budget meeting last Wednesday. There was a notice of potential quorum, and that allowed for more than just the Budget and Finance Committee to attend, because there were a lot of requests that we have received from the different departments, either for consideration of capital items that they saw as needs, or also some positions that they saw as needs that had been frozen since we had COVID. And since our budget has certainly improved, and with all of the work that Navajo has had in both the turnaround as well as their biodiesel project, we've had some extremely good gross receipts tax revenue months in the last few months. And so it's a thing where when you've been running lean and mean, there's a point at which you should actually look at some of the needs that you may have basically deferred because you weren't sure where your revenues were being. And so we had the meeting a week ago Wednesday. The Budget Committee had passed some recommendations. The recommendations included things like some new trucks for the water department. There were an IT part-time position. There were additional unfreezing some of the positions in streets and parks, allowing them to hire back to get staffed up, because prior to COVID, there were 14 people in that department. They're down to 9.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you're doing or attempting to do the same work that you did with 14 and now you have 9, it makes it real challenging to actually get all the grass mowed and manicured in the summer the same way when you have that many less people. But it's a thing where John A. and his crew have done an outstanding job to try to actually take care of us to where folks didn't notice the difference. But I know they've been extremely busy in the last 2 years with the reduced staff. But anyway, some of those were added back in. And then, there were a variety of additional items, both on the capital side and some on the, I know in planning, they had previously had a position that was a planning administrator. With what we have in the way of code enforcement and all, it was a thing where they looked at the fact that rather than unfreezing that position, that they probably needed it more as a second code enforcement person to actually just help with that work. And if you only have one, when they take a vacation, then you have none.
Yeah.
And so as a result, and it's a thing where this last year, obviously, we had real moisture.
That's right. Well, that's true. Yeah.
And in
For
fact,
a little while, anyway.
Yeah, and in fact, every time we now have a windstorm, I'm getting some of the results that blow in from
the tumbleweeds.
that are still showing up at my house. But it's a thing where there were a lot of discussion, and also we authorized the second half in our budget this year for many of our outside agencies, Main Street, the Chamber, various organizations that the city supports in the last couple of years. we would only do half at the time of the initial budget and then look to see if we were still financially solvent. Fortunately, we have been the last couple of years, and so there was the authorization of the second half of what our annual support has been to those organizations, and so those kind of things were actually addressed in this.
So the possibility of hiring and some of these other changes, would this come in the next fiscal year, or
No.
would this be in this current fiscal year?
Yeah, the budget resolution actually put money in, or unfroze those positions and put money into this year's budget to actually do those to where they can actually go ahead, and I'm sure today they're actually posting openings for those positions in the departments. And if someone is a great employee, I'd love to have them apply. We're looking for great employees because, and I'm serious because, I mean, we have great employees in the city, and the worst thing you can do is hire weak links, because for your great employees, if they are working with someone who is not performing and, sliding as far as they can to do as little as possible, that then makes the great employees go, well, why am I?
Well, that's exactly right.
Why am I kicking tail?
Yeah.
And, and we have great employees across the city. And as a result, we want to find great employees to help them all be better and do a fine job, because the better your employees are, it takes less employees to do the same task if they all are excited about what they're doing and dedicated to their job. So
excellent.
Yeah. But anyway, that was passed. There were actually what was passed on Wednesday had some adjustments when it got into the council's packet. And so we actually spent a little time working through to make sure that the counselors, because we didn't want someone who attended the Wednesday meeting and thought something was there at this dollar level to then, if they happen to look later and see, well, hold it, that dollar amount changed, why it changed, and to make sure that everybody was aware of the changes that had been done. But, we then, and one of the items that we failed to catch, and it was brought up last night, was there was approved at the budget meeting the second code enforcement, that changing the planning administrator to the code enforcement, and the resolution, even after all the work we did trying to make sure it was exactly right, we failed to include that. And so
I had to go back and
well, what we wound up doing was we went ahead and had a separate motion, because we have a couple of large capital outlay requests that we are doing or have made to our legislators and the governor's office for possible help for the city. And there was a suggestion that we might consider actually doing some type of partial match into those large projects to enhance our ability to be possibly selected for funding in those projects. And so we had talked about at the council budget shop actually approving $1 million commitment for each one of those large projects. And so we voted on it last night, as well as voted to put that position of code enforcement back into this year's budget, and then it'll come forward as an additional budget adjustment resolution next meeting. And if there's anything else that we didn't quite get taken care of, we can include it in that adjustment. But anyway, council approved that, and we updated the council on our capital outlay request and stuff. We've actually not only met with our legislators, but I had the opportunity to visit with the governor and her staff by Zoom and request these large items. And we're cautiously hopeful, because we recognize that there is a lot of money this year in Santa Fe, and it's not only the regular budget money, but there's also some federal money there's some infrastructure money, and things are targeted towards infrastructure. And we have, our 3 capital outlay projects are all infrastructure. It's first one is a new water well out by the tank on the west side of town. That's about $1.5 million project to actually drill a new water well, equip it for the city. It winds up being a second one is the 26th Street project from Hermosa to Grand. That's about a $6 million project. And then the East Hermosa is about a $5 million project. And so basically the $1 million commitment was for the $6 million and the $5 million, to where we're basically now asking the state to see if they would help us with $5 million on the $6 million and $4 million on the $5 million. And of course, as I described last night, because we had some of the folks in the audience, or some of the folks that are running for council, to give them a little more clarity of, what we're trying to do. Obviously, previously we have done the North 13th project, the South 13th project, and then the West Hermosa project.
Right.
Well, I think the total of those 3 projects adds up to $21 million.
And was there any state assistance on any of that?
No, that $21 million came out of all of our funds.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the 2 sessions ago, we asked for help for the engineering for the 26th Street and the East Hermosa of $500,000 each, and we received that in capital outlay. Well, we've actually awarded those projects. One was awarded previously, and then the other one was awarded at our last meeting. The 26th Street engineering should be done in August of this year. The East Hermosa should be done by the end of December. But that's $1 million of engineering that the state helped us with. Well, if we could actually receive funding for some of these large projects, or even partial funding, it just means it's money that doesn't come out of our funds to where it allows us to have some additional funds for the smaller internal projects of resurfacing streets and stuff in our communities.
So is the budget such then that whether the state assists or not, the city has the money for the 26th Street project and the Hermosa?
What the city has done previously with the 13th projects and the West Hermosa is they borrowed the money and then paid the debt out of our infrastructure tax. And so certainly we could move forward with those projects through borrowing and all, and then committing our future revenues. But it's a thing where I prefer not paying interest, not paying fees to bond brokers. And if we could get some help from the state, it would wind up making these projects a lot less expensive and leave more of our money for other projects inside the city. And I mean, there's plenty of streets that could use some reconditioning.
Right
yeah, exactly.
We've got about a minute left. Was there anything else that you want to mention?
No, we had an executive session, but it was short. It was just a personnel matter. We accepted a resignation of an employee who didn't show up for the job. But anyway, they explained all of that in closed session. And then it's a thing where, like I say, the item that I'd suggest to folks most is March 1st is the election. Learn about the candidates, find out about what people stand for, and make a decision and go vote. I'm sure there will be early voting as well as being available there on March 1st, and I'm sure there's also absentee. But it's a thing where it's make an informed decision and be a part. In other words, I plan on doing it, and I hope everybody in the community will consider actually being active, because unfortunately we're not lined up with all of the other elections.
Right.
And if there's no turnout, then you can't complain if you didn't vote.
Absolutely.
About who got in and what they did or didn't do for you.
Very good. Mayor Raye Miller, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. And we will